Hello, everyone. We will be checking out a little bit of news once again. So let us get started. Let's see here. Move myself out the way. So you have here women in Antarctica face assault and harassment and a legacy of exclusion and mistreatment. A legacy of exclusion and mistreatment. See, they're being assaulted and harassed. How are they also being excluded? Unless it's happening. Let's just get into the story. I don't know what's going on here. A federal report, in the words of its key finding, assault, harassment, and stalking are problems in U.S. Antarctica program community, and that very small, efforts dedicated to prevention are nearly absent, drew attention around the world. But as a historian of Antarctic science, I did not find it surprising at all. Is it because I would assume that the population is mostly men and the women that are there are very low in number? So these problems will arise because of well, I would assume the dating life is not very accommodating for most of those men, and those women uh, most probably have a lot of attention on them, and because of that, they have a lot of power. And I would believe that because they have that much power, they might use it or abuse it, and things might not go well because the nature of that power that they have. Yeah. Uh, the report released in August 2022 by the National Science Foundation, which runs the United States Antarctic program, found that many scientists and workers believe human resources staff are dismissing and minimizing, shaming, and blaming victims who report harassment and assault. A report with similar findings about its national program was released by the Australian Antarctic Division in late September 2022. I find it hard to believe that the human resources would engage in something like this. Because that doesn't make any sense. That's something that you would lose your job over. And you would think they would be more incentivized to take care of these problems because it would look bad on them, and they would probably get promoted if they were to handle these issues. I find this hard to believe. But it is also very difficult in situations like these to find out who is lying and who's telling the truth. So it could be that there are some situations where these things are true, but there are a lot of situations where it's not. And the liars sort of create a bias in the minds of the investigators when it comes to certain situations where it might be true. So that's what I would assume is the situation there. The fields of Antarctic science and exploration have long excluded women from the region altogether and still have strong culture focused on masculinity and chauvinism. What? That doesn't make any sense. It seems like because it's a desert and a harsh environment that more men would be willing to go to that environment than women. Doesn't sound like an exclusion. I doubt that they would exclude them because if there's a lot of men over there, they would very be welcoming to the idea of women showing up. So I find that hard to believe. First, and if it's mostly men there, then it would make sense that they would have a culture focused on masculinity because it's a bunch of men associating with each other. And why would it be chauvinism? How does that even come into play? There would have to be women in the first place for them to even act in that way. But if they're being if the women feel like they're being excluded, then how are they worried about the culture that they're being excluded from? Why can't they just associate with each other and create their own environment instead of having a problem with the men creating a culture where they're focusing on each other and associating with each other? Because obviously there's a great inequality in the numbers. So the men, I mean, they're gonna have to bond with each other because there's just not enough women around. And the kind of personalities of individuals that you get that would even go for that, it's going to be a lot of men that are seeking adventure. So yeah, they would have a common sort of cultural bond that includes this. But the chauvinism part, I don't believe at all. That sounds like something you just, if you feel excluded and you have all these grievances against the men because they have their own culture and you don't feel like you're accepted, then I would see where you would label them all these things. So this seems a little bit biased, and right away I don't trust this report in any way. An early opportunity. The first Antarctic expedition to include women was the Rhone Antarctic Research Expedition in 1947 to 1948. That is a long time ago. And considering the issue, if you want to say it's being sexist, and this is happening in 1947, I'm thinking your claim is bullshit. Because we're a lot more accepting nowadays than people were back then, and they still let you in. You might just be full of shit. A US-based expedition with funding from the government and private sources led by US Captain Finn Ron, his wife Edith Jackie Ronnie accompanied her husband, as did Jenny Darlington, the wife of one of the pilots. Yeah, it's just a bunch of men that went with their wives. What is, oh God, this is so stupid. Their inclusion was groundbreaking. Why? Why wouldn't they bring their wives? If they were going to live there, if they're going to be there for maybe, I assume it's going to be years, why wouldn't they bring their wives? I would think the men push to have their wives there. How's this groundbreaking? But their presence also was perceived by many in the polar community to contribute to tensions between the young and experienced men. Yeah, of course it would. There's only 2 women available, even if their husbands are there, and there's a bunch of young men around, and those women are open to receiving that sort of attention. It's going to cause problems. I don't see why this would be controversial. It seems like an obvious issue that would come up. It's almost like people conveniently forget human nature just to create their own narrative. Hardening into a mold of accusation, innuendo, and dissension. Yes, the accusation parts I get. Innuendo, yeah, a bunch of dudes, yeah, they're gonna be thinking about sex and they're gonna make jokes about it. And dissension, I don't, are all those things contributed are those things being associated with the women? I think it's just conflict. Like there's going to be even if those women that weren't there, there's going to be conflict. There's going all those things would still exist without the women. Like as someone that served in the military, especially even when we didn't have women around, these things still happen. Like it's not gonna go away, and it's not particularly sexist. It's just something that happens. That's why there's such a thing as conflict resolution. Tension and turmoil were to take precedent over pioneering. Yeah, just poor leadership. These people were explorers. There weren't uh, experience in leading a group and knowing the sort of problems that might arise and taking steps to sort of avoid those things. I can see that. Jackie Ron Ronnie Ronnie would return to Antarctica several times, but at the first expedition's conclusion, Jenny Darlington asserted that women do not belong in Antarctica because of the harsh conditions, which might cause a person to require assistance and even rescue. Yes, that makes sense. Because these women were just wives. They weren't people trained to survive in those harsh conditions. That makes perfect sense. Because it would endanger the rescuers' lives to go out and try to save these people. Also makes sense. She wrote, men should not be put in a position of endangering his own safety for another lesser physical human. Well, you probably shouldn't have said those words, but considering the time period that this happened, I would see why he would say that. Yeah, but yeah, he does have a point. Uh, the the lesser physical human thing is stupid. Even if it was an incompetent man, the same issue would be present. It doesn't. That's unnecessary. But I get his point. Darlington also reflected on the emotional burden she undertook. Whoa. Was a woman saying this? Wow. She got no chill. Darlington also reflected on the emotional burden she undertook. Many men, including her husband, believed that Antarctica symbolized a haven, a place of high ideals, and that inner peace men find only in all-male atmosphere in primitive surroundings. She wrote, my job was to be as inconspicuous within the group as possible. I felt that all feminine instincts should be sublimated. I was determined not to act like a woman in a man's world. This seems like personal problems, right? It just seems like you were intimidated by their camaraderie and their way that they bonded, and you try to make yourself as small as possible because you felt like you weren't welcome. What are they supposed to do? Start wearing dresses and talking about drama? Like they don't. It's not their job to adapt to you just because you feel a certain way. But and you just this alone adds to why you're being excluded, because you made a problem in your head, and now people are supposed to what, make you feel better about your mental issues. She also commented on the psychological difficulty for both the women. It was a tenuous balance in which, as women, we bore the major responsibility for the men's conduct towards us. Mm, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure your husbands wouldn't wouldn't just be like completely fine with how men act towards you, unless you're accepting that attention, unless you enjoyed that attention. then they would have a problem with it. But rewriting it as you bore the major responsibility, I think you bore the major responsibility when it comes to your own actions, as all people do. This rewording of things is problematic. Any drawing of attention to myself, yes, that would be a problem. As a married woman in an expedition full of men, drawing attention to yourself in a way that might invite male attention could be a problem. How do you not see this? Any gesture or indication that I expected certain courtesies, any show of bossiness or pretense would have been resented. Of course it would be. Like, what? What are you talking about? Like, this is normal. It no matter what, even you were just living your normal life, if you were just like being uh entitled and being bossy towards people that don't even really know you, they would also not like you. Like, that's stupid. Excluding women. The global scientific effort called the International Geophysical Year in 1957 to 1958 changed the nature of an Antarctic research from relatively small short-term expeditions to establishment of permanent bases on the continent. But as various countries shaped their respective Antarctic programs, many were adamant that women would not be included. I mean, considering this bullshit, like, it's hard to make a case that they improve the situation. The U.S. Navy admin George DeFuck, the supervisor of U.S. programs in Antarctica, declared in 1957 that women will not be allowed in the Antarctic until we can provide one woman for every man. Exactly my point, implying that there would be no need for women in Antarctica except as sexual partners for the men. No, that's not what he implied. He's implying that if there's an equal assortment of people to go around and people to date, that there wouldn't be a complete imbalance where a bunch of men are vying for the attention of a couple of women, and which can cause problems and drama and infighting and conflict. Whereas if there's an equal divide, then it could be a more stable environment. That is what he's implying. It just stupid. Vivian Fox, I bet she does. The director of British and Antarctic Survey from 1958 to 1973. So look at this. Women weren't included, but this woman was in charge. She was a director of the survey. Took a similar position in the 1950s and declared as late as so all these women are just saying women shouldn't be included. I don't, what? 1982, should it happen one day that women are included as part of the base complement, problems will certainly arise, of course, and lead to breakdown of that sense of unity, which is so important in the group, especially when your survival is at risk. It's not time for inclusion and making people feel comfortable. You can die in this environment, ladies. This is not the time to be fighting this battle. The first women to formally participate in the United States fieldwork were those in the expedition led by geochemist Louis Jones in 1969. Jones was permitted by the National Science Foundation to visit Antarctica only if she could form Lois Jones. Okay. Only if she could form an all-women's expedition. Yeah, that would make sense. If she was just the lone woman, it would only lead to a host of problems that would be hard to deal with, especially in a harsh environment like that. It's very hard to control people, especially hard to control their urges and to protect a particular woman, because who's going to be doing the protecting? The possible people that would also be the ones that would possibly victimize her. So you have more women, the men would act accordingly because they have more options and they would be less desperate, and you would have less issues. So yeah, I agree. Or a team of four. Oh, four. Ooh, that's not good. That's not enough. Four was among the first six women. Okay, so what, the other two weren't included in her team to visit the South Pole in a publicity stunt orchestrated by the US Navy, in which the women were labeled power powder puff explorers by the media. That's hilarious. That's that's funny. People were people were very humorous back then. A senior New Zealand geologist whom Jones had lobbied for assistance with her initial application later appeared to regret it. He wrote a sexist screed. Is that a word? I've never heard this word. I have to look that up. Declaring the floodgates opened and every feminist worldwide screams sexism and racism. He's right. The freaking article proves his point. That is not a sexist screed. He is right. If they were refused an extensive 3-month Antarctic trip, it is an age-old desire of unmarried females to be where the boys are, and in many I have met, there is no question that this was a dominant urge. He spoke facts. How's this sexist? How is this sexist? Oh my God. Irene Pendon. I mean, seriously, like throughout this article, the women have said more sexist thing than this guy has ever said. Like he was very respectful and he was just speaking facts. These ladies were like calling women all kinds of like inferior, physical, like they were like seriously saying some sexist things. But this guy got to the label of sexist. That's ridiculous. Now, obstacles abound. Irene Pendon, the first woman to work in the Antarctic interior, went in 1970 to study the movement of very low radio frequency waves, but it wasn't easy. She later wrote, for whatever reason, probably because there had been so much foot dragging about and resentment of the first women going there, a mythology had been created about the women who'd gone to the coast, that they had been a problem. Haven't they? I heard that their presence had been a problem and they had not been productive because they had not established anything yet. Had they? I mean, it'd be weird if they were saying this and it wasn't true. But you haven't established that it's not true. You're just saying. Yet it had only been a few months since that first group of women had finished their research season, and generally it takes more than a year for field data to be converted into scientific articles. Generally. Are the men expected to have a similar deadline as they expected from the women? I would think so. I would think the men aren't expected to do generally. I would think that if they're being funded, that whoever is funding them would expect them to show some sort of results, especially within a few months, to see that the money wasn't wasted. So this is not an attack on the women. This is just like what is expected. And generally, like it's just that when it happened to the men, they're not complaining about it, and you just go on to prove the point that the women are a problem, because as soon as the people funding them ask them to show some results, that now they're just like, oh, well, you should wait generally for a year, or like this is just stupid. Women finish their research and generally take, okay, Further, the US Navy, which controlled the transportation to and from within Antarctica, also urged that Hendon should be forbidden because of the lack of women's bathrooms on board ships and in the Antarctic in general. Yes, that would also create a problem because of the lack of separate bathrooms. It could be a problem. And if they only had like 4 women in a ship full of thousands of men, and they just separated one bathroom for the women, and like all these guys have to share a bathroom now, that creates a problem. Like, how do you not understand this? This is just logistics. This isn't sexism. It is a complaint that was echoed throughout the period of women's integration into Antarctic national programs through the 1990s. Yes, just the factor of gender creates a whole host of problems because now you have to change how everything works to accommodate, which means that if everything is built to work in a certain way and you have to change it around to accommodate a certain group of people, it creates a problem just off of that. It's not, it's not like an attack. It's a problem that people have to address. And if the benefits of addressing that problem and changing things to accommodate you doesn't outweigh the work that goes into it, why would they do it? It's not like it's basically all these men are going to Antarctica to do certain things, and they're being funded to go through the research process, right? And these women show up and they're like, well, we want to do it too. I was like, well, that's fine, but you going doesn't add to the situation. It doesn't help in any way because these men are perfectly capable of doing the job. You might be able to do just as good a job, but taking you comes with these added problems that is unnecessary and doesn't benefit anyone. So it's just, just a logical issue. I don't know. While most participating investigators did not need to write a proposal to get a trip to Antarctica to put pressure on the Navy, the National Science Foundation required that she write a specific proposal for short-term trip that have in peer review and get an improved internally. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. They would want a short-term trip to avoid certain issues, and it would cost less money. And yeah, they would want approval. After I went through that whole rigmarole, yeah, admin, paperwork, all that stuff is going to be a problem regardless of your gender. They kept dragging their feet. Of course, they kept dragging their feet because there was no benefit to them pushing forward the process. They were simply doing it as a political move, mostly to just to assuage people of calling them sexist. So, there was no need for them to move forward with the process in any faster terms. So Pendon arranged to give a briefing on her work to relevant people from the National Science Foundation and the Navy so that the Navy leadership could see how totally scientific and professional I was. Well, that doesn't matter at that point because the men could be scientific and professional as well, but you wanted to be included specifically, and you're not using your own money to get this stuff done. You're using other people's money, and it has to benefit them. You have to sell yourself to them, so you have to be above and beyond in order to compensate them for the money that they're spending. So it is basically like you trying to prove that I'm just as good when you have to prove that you're better in order to compensate for the issues that are arising because of your presence. I would realize that I was not some adventurous just trying to get down there where all the men were, which was the kind of thing they were saying. Yes, is the kind of thing I would say as well. Because it sounds like you were. Sounds like you're trying to prove you're just as good. You're trying to compete with the men and trying to get down there. For what reason exactly? Are you a serious scientist with serious research implications? Because you're not showing any of this. You're just complaining that that you haven't given enough time to write these articles. Like, have you produced anything of worth? Even after all this time, I would hope at the end of this, she would show that she's produced something that was worth anything. Otherwise, what they're saying about her would be true. The admiral in question did not come to the meeting. I don't think he would be required to do that. I don't know why he would be required to do that. Do you have something important to say? However, he later gave permissions for her travel if she could find a woman to accompany her. Safety in numbers. Rather than find another scientist, Pendant was accompanied by a New Zealand mountaineer, a woman with credentials that can actually help you. She's a mountaineer. She has experience in this kind of stuff. Well done. While on the ice, Pendant was warned by the station chief, if you fail, there won't be another woman on the Antarctic continent for a generation. Makes perfect sense, because you're breaking ground at this point, and if you fail, there wouldn't be another one. It just because there would be an outrage. First of all, the political nightmare of them allowing a bunch of women to go there, and then they fail, and they got hurt or they died or something, or they just disappeared, and then people would complain back at home, like, why were these women left on their own and not protected or whatever? Like, it's just be a political nightmare. So to avoid any of that situation for generations to come, they would probably not allow that sort of situation to take place. So, I mean, it's a lot of pressure, but that's what you kind of signed up for. Hostility bills. One major result of the practice of excluding women and singling them out as outsiders was that behavior explicitly hostile to women became commonplace. What are those behaviors? Please state them. While women started being part of the United States research program in 1969, the British Antarctic Survey did not fully integrate until 1996. What are the behaviors are you talking about? Finally allowing women to spend the winter at their remote Halle Station. In the bases and the expeditions mounted by both nations and other countries to Antarctica remain constructed as a place that was decidedly male. Yes, it as I would expect, because as was stated earlier in this article, it was harsh conditions. And as someone that served with women in harsh conditions, they're not exactly pleasant. They complain all the time, even though they're subjected to the same conditions as everyone else, and they have favorable conditions than everybody else. Like, the women aren't treated the same. They get preferential. God damn it, I can't even speak right now. They get better treatment than the men in conditions like this, but they still complain because things aren't perfect. So I would understand why it would be a problem. Pornographic material was publicly consumed and even created. Yeah. What do you expect them to do? Like, when they're not allowed to even please themselves when they're around your presence? Is that one of the examples of hostile things towards women? Walls were often decorated with images of nude or scantily clad women. What do you, of course, even during World War II, they had freaking rockets with like sexy women painted on them. Like, this is not new. And why does that offend you? The carpenter's hut at Australia's Mawson Station famously included the Sistine ceiling with clippings of over 90 Playboy models plastered over the ceiling and walls. Yes, why does that offend you, though? This remained at Mawson until 2005, 20 years after women were allowed to work at the station. That year, it was destroyed by an unknown person to the disappointment of some who felt the destroyer had assumed the right to play heritage vandal or moral police for everyone. Yeah, that would be assumed. Yeah, that would be a problem if you just destroy their artwork. Today, the idea that Antarctica is a region dominated by adventurous hero scientists persists. The stereotypical image of a man sporting an ice-encrusted beard remains the most emblematic visage of the Antarctic explorer. Yes, because most of them have that image. So it'd be representative of the group. If most of the group fit a certain image, then yes, that would be the representation of them. Like, I don't, it's like her problem is with logic. How do you battle logic to this point that you write an entire article that just makes you look like an idiot, an incompetent idiot at that? And this view of an Antarctica as a place for men continues to create barriers to women's participation, both on stations and a remote field. How would it be a place for women? Like, how does that even appeal to most women? Like, I don't even want to go there, and I'm a man. Like, that place sounds like hell. Like, I ain't trying to hang out with a bunch of dudes in the snow. Like, no. And like, God damn it. Indeed, Antarctic science remains highly male dominated, of course, which during the early days of the Me Too movement in 2017 revealed many troubling allegations about the dangers that women continue to face. Yes, like you're essentially created a prison in a desert, and if you put a bunch of women in a prison, in an all-male prison or male-dominated prison, the same issues that you're having there, you're going to have, you know what I mean, in that situation, including harassment and even assault. So while this recent National Science Foundation report may have many shocking and revealing elements, none of it is a surprise to any woman who has either worked or attempted to work in Antarctica. This was a full line of bullshit. I can't believe I subjected myself to that, but so it is.